Yeah.
Hey everyone, really nice to be here and nice to meet everyone. I did join most of the tables and try to get to meet everyone on a personal level. Um, it's really nice to be here. And I'm just going to share my screen so that I work with that. Okay, so please, can you see my screen? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Today I'm going to be talking about React Native first steps. And it's one topic where I know you're going to enjoy because if you're just getting into React Native, it's something that you really want to put at the back of your mind before you go ahead and start that new project, or probably have an existing project and you might feel that everything is getting so clustered and overwhelming. Well, this talk is for you, and I'm very sure you would pick one or two things during the talk. So do stay to the end, and I hope you enjoy it. Before I start, just a little about me. I'm Oluwatobi Shokunbi. I know that name might sound hard to pronounce, so you could just call me Toby. Everyone calls me Toby. A software engineer based in Nigeria, Abuja. I write code. I'm a YouTube instructor and a technical writer. So if you want to learn more about software development, specifically based into React Native and React, you could check my work on YouTube, and you could also check some of my works on Medium if you love to read. My handle is just1 0. I'm very sure I will come up when you search. I'm also the founder of React Native Nigeria community. So it's a community just like this one where we host meetups and conference specifically to React Native, because we believe React Native is the next big thing and we want to be part of that force as it goes forward. So if you're all about meetups, please check out our meetup. Do attend, feel free, and I'm very sure you would learn a couple of things and also meet new people. So straight to my talk, let's get started. There is this thing about React Native that it's 100% easy, and the fun fact is that to a large extent it actually is, because React Native is basically using JavaScript to write React Native mobile apps. Be it in iOS, be it in Android, you're basically using JavaScript to write React, to build mobile applications. And it goes way beyond this, because in the long run, it's not just about building mobile apps. It becomes a bit of hell when your code base begins to get large. It becomes a bit of hell when a lot of things start becoming too much, because it's not like there is a predefined structure for how to write React Native, or there's a predefined structure on how to build mobile applications React Native. You kind of draft out your own structure as you build your mobile apps, and you get to this point where you begin to notice that anything can go wrong in a matter of time, especially when you didn't take the time to actually set up a lot of things and set up your React Native project very well. You tend to notice that you have a lot of repetition of codes. You don't really understand your project anymore. Things just get a whole lot confusing, and a lot of things contribute to this factor, ranging from your app getting large. And let's say your app started off as a single page application, and over the next 6 months it has exploded and become something as even as big as containing thousands of lines of code. And not having a very good structure would tell on your code in the long run, not just on you but on other people on the team, because everything becomes very clustered, everything does become very arranged, and you wouldn't really enjoy React Native the way you are supposed to. Another thing that also might affect or be a key factor into this is the hands on the project increases. And as I said earlier, React Native doesn't really have a predefined structure. You kind of build out your own structure as you work on the project, and everyone coming to work on that application will definitely be coming with their own mentality, with their own structure, with their own ways of doing things. And if you don't take the time out to do all this structure in your own React Native application, you tend to see multiple approach being used, different structures, and it becomes something that you can't manage anymore. It becomes overwhelming. So in this talk, what I would like to be going over is a lot of notable points that you can try out in your next React Native application, or you can even use in your current application. The main point is this. The main aim is these points are things that would really improve your React Native application by long shots. When you start to use these points in your React Native application, you would definitely have notable changes. And so let's get right to it and let's find out what those points are. The first thing I would like to go over is everything is a config. And this makes a lot of sense because React Native works with a lot of things, from images to fonts to colors to environment variables and to navigations. These are mainly most of the things you would be using on, if not 100% of most screens, but at least at 90% of most of the screens. You would want to basically show probably an image. You will basically have to decide the font that you'll be using in most of those screens when designing your mobile applications. You would be using colors, be it on text, be it on a view, be it probably a background color. You would be using most of these things, environment variables, down to secret keys, down to whatever you might decide to use as your environment variables would be going inside there. Things like API endpoints that you would be hitting across your applications. You would basically have all this in ENVs, and also navigations. So when navigating to multiple screens, you would notice that you would have different names for different screens. And if you are not careful, you might tend to use a name twice in most routes. So how does everything down from image, font, colors, ENVs, and navigation translates to everything being a config? So I'll go over that in a while now. Now, config setup. If you look at the image here, I just took a screenshot of what I felt was a config setup. And if you see what I did here, you could see that down to everything for for fonts, that's at the right-hand side, far left, you will see that I have different images with different namings. So both italics, black italics, bold. You can see down to light, you can see to medium, you can see regular, you can see semi-bold, you can see semi-bold italics. So all these things translates to different fonts you'll be using across your application. And this makes sense to have everything in one place and probably call them in your application when you do font size, and call probably this font config, and now call secondary, and then the exact font type you would be needing. This makes a lot of sense because you have every font now in just one global place, where once you change this, you are definitely sure that the fonts across all pages in your app will also reflect these changes, as opposed to writing your fonts directly. And whenever whenever there's a need to change probably the fonts you'll be using in your application, it will be more stress going through each page individually and trying to manually edit all of them, as opposed to just having a config like this where you edit just this file and everything across your application will pick. The next config you can see is colors, and it takes the same mindset in font configs, where you have your primary colors, you have your text on primary colors, you have your warning, you have your text danger, you have even down to gradients when you'll be working with things like creating gradients for your application, be it in buttons, be it in screens. You can see that everything still boils down to having a config for it. So right now, when you would want to work with colors across your applications, you would know that, okay, primary colors are probably this color code, and all across your application. Once you want to use primary, you know that is going to be picking this correct color. Whenever a time presents itself where probably there's a UI change, or going forward there's like a whole revamp of the whole entire application, coming here to just change your color schemas would be like a piece of cake, as opposed to going all over your applications to change just one color. This makes everything look neat. It makes it easier for anyone coming on the team to work on this project to really understand what they'll be doing going forward in the application, or things that they will be working on, instead of creating new colors. The next thing over there is image configs. I hope you can see that, but it does take the same mindset of having every asset in one folder, and just everything is going to be imported over here and exported. So when I would want to use an image, I would just be calling my images from here, and React Native would, and all across the application, I'll be able to use this particular image anywhere. And it also reduces the need for always probably importing or requiring specific assets all over your application. Right here, when someone is supposed to work on your code base and he's looking for a set asset, they'll basically just come to this file, also look at what they're looking for. If the assets they're looking for is here, they just call it and use it. If it's not, they probably would export and add it to the project, and also follow the same convention to have everything look more neat and presentable to the eye. You would notice that this approach makes things a whole lot easier and a whole lot better, because everything is now a config. Anyone coming to the application to read it, to use it, can basically understand what is being set and how to use it in what the particular screen probably they'll be designing, or a particular screen they'll be currently converting from UI to code. This makes everything a whole lot easier and neat. Down to navigation configs. Navigation is a little bit the same, but tricky. Now, you would notice that in navigation, you would have different route names where that you would necessarily want to use. So say I have an application that has start, main, and auth. Where start might probably represent app logic as loaders, stored keys, and probably to know if the user has been signed in before, and probably authenticate the same user all over again. But the approach here is that I have all the name of the screens that I'll be calling in a config file, in a navigation config file, all listed this way, where I can now call them individually and use them probably when I'm calling my React navigation, when I'm calling navigation.navigate, then I just call this global config to call the set screen I need. And you can see that they are reusable, because when I even create my navigation stack using React navigation, you can see that I also called on the key level where I called navigate2.start, and it picks that as the key, and all across the app I could just also still always use navigate2.start, and it makes everything a little bit more neat and easier to read. And if someone else is coming on the project to probably create a new screen, they will probably also see that, okay, this screen name I'm about to use has been probably created by another developer or is already in use, so I should probably get more creative and make a new name from the screen I'm currently working on. It makes everything, it brings this level of neatness to your code, and very easy for anyone to really understand what is going on. So that's it for config. Moving on. One other thing you would also want to always take note of is always rebuilding reusable functional components. And this is really type of important, because funny enough, I did compare a file size of a component written in class component and one written in functional component, and it will surprise you the amount of size that you would strip off if you use functional components. It's not really big, but it's something to know that it actually influences your file size. And aside that, functional components are much so easier to read, they're easier to understand, and they're easier to reason about, easier to test. So it's just something you would want to try out, because it makes your code look more neater and easier to go about what you would want to do. Okay, one also thing that it's very important is focus on crafting out a folder structure and sticking with it. Most times when I go on a code base and try to read or try to understand the code base. I take so much time trying to understand what the folder structure is, where certain things are being kept before I even go about writing code. And it's not supposed to be so. You have to take out a chunk of your time before you even start writing any React Native, before you even start focusing on your app, to try and draft out a very good folder structure that you can work with. Most people might go with a lot of templates. Some people might already go with already preset templates created, but know that this doesn't take a lot of time to actually draft out. Tops takes 20 minutes or 10 minutes. And once you have your whole folder structure set up, it's something that will be a breeze for you and you won't really have so much issues. For me, one of the folder structures that I kind of came out with before the talk was everyone always kind of have this SRC folder which represents source. And your SRC folder will definitely have things like your components where you drop components that you might want to reuse across your applications, ranging from text inputs to headers, to screen layouts, whatever it may be. You could have all those components placed in one folder. You could have asset folder, and asset folder is basically where you have things like images and fonts that they make up the most part of your assets. And you could dump out all your images here, all your fonts here, and you could go with the same mentality of having a config and calling all those assets there, and probably exporting those files so that people can still reuse them in the screens that they'll be working on. Then you have your screen folder, your navigation folder, and your store. Now, bear in mind that this structure isn't the best per se. No structure is the best. The structure that works for you is the best. But always make it conscious. Always make it a conscious thing to always have your folder structure ready before you even start coding. You should always have your folder structure that you want to work with, and always stick with it. Don't overcreate, or don't bring in new structures as you build your app. Always have that structure laid out that works for you and work with it. One other thing I also want to go over is the use of type checking. Now, there are a lot of alternative out there. We do have TypeScript, we do have Flow, we do have prop types from React. These are like options that you would want to really try out. I can't go over like a ton of reasons why you would want to go with TypeScript, because I tend to use TypeScript a lot. I most recently started using TypeScript, but I've been enjoying it. But you really want to check your types. You really want to make sure that the type you are using for a certain field is exactly what it is, and it is what you are passing. And also, TypeScript also just makes things a whole lot easier for you by doing some runtime checks. Say you create a component and you create a component and you could pass in the props for those components, and in those, when you want to reuse that component, you will basically get like an IDE warning of probably a prop is missing or a prop hasn't been added. So it kind of shows you the error in your code before you even run the code. So it makes things a whole lot easier. I wouldn't necessarily give you reason why one is better than the other, but what I would try to say is make sure you're checking your types in your application. It goes a long way. Another thing you would also want to do is employ to use a little bit of automation. React Native apps are so much easy to write these days that it can get really big in a little amount of time. You could be working on a very simple application, and in a matter of 2 weeks, you find out that you have this little application has turned into something so big that it becomes overwhelming, and you have things from testing to you have not just writing things to bother about aside from writing the code. You have things like testing, you have things like continuous integration, you have things like always getting the APK ready or the IPA ready for the clients to review. You have a lot of other things to go about doing aside from just writing codes. So it's very important to try to set up CI/CD in your application. You could use App Center using code. You could use code pushes in App Center. You could use Fastlane. This takes a whole chunk of work from you, as it allows you to now focus more on writing codes, and it gives you this relaxed feel of rest of mind that your application will definitely be deployed and sent out to the people that are supposed to test it, or the developers that are supposed to test it, or the testing team. And it will also help you run your test if you write tests. Also important, you should write tests so you ensure your application does what it's meant to do. Use alias import. Using alias import is it's very important, especially when you're working with large teams. Having to always import modules in your application like this looks a little bit on not neat, and things can get messy quick. Say for instance, you mistakenly, or a developer mistakenly switches a file from a folder or moves a folder to a different location in your application, you will definitely know that it will begin to break. Things will definitely start to pop up, all sorts of red screens on your mobile application. So it's very important for you to always try to use alias imports. It makes things a little bit faster, as developers would now know that, okay, there's an alias import already set up for, say, assets. So instead of always manually navigating to where the asset file is, what they will be doing is calling probably the module of the asset, and they can use it across your application. One of the ways to set up alias import is a very simple plugin. It's called Babel plugin module resolver. It's very easy to set up. As you can see on my screen, you just run the npm command to install. After that, you'll be creating a babelrc folder in the root of your application, and you'll just copy this config. If you look at most important thing in this screenshot is I do have this root object. I do have this root object where I have this src listed there, and I have aliases where I now have where I want it to look for those files. So this makes everything a little bit more better, because if I need any source of assets, fonts, I won't necessarily have to always backslash and navigate manually to that folder and look for it. But with setups like this, it's going to be far more easier, because I will just have to call my SRC and it knows exactly where to look for me. We have spoke on a lot of things. I can't even believe I've spoke on this on a lot. But let's do a quick review. And one of the things we review is you should always keep at the back of your mind is always use a config. Configs are very important to what you build and what you are doing. They make your code look neat, and it's easier for anyone who's coming on that project to work on it to know exactly what to do. And it kind of gives this structure that isn't already there in your application. Write functional components more. Write functional components more because, as we said earlier, it minified the file size to a large extent. You would enjoy the benefit of functional component, and aside that, it comes with hooks. So it takes the whole stress of the whole stress that comes with class component and makes it far more swift and easier for you, and it's easier to read. Another thing we also talked about was craft out a working folder structure and stick with it. It's always very hard to get a working folder structure that works for you. Everyone is always creating theirs, everyone's always working with theirs, but try and find one that works for you and stick with it. I did show you a demo of mine. Other thing is to always check for types. But whichever one you go with, whether it's Flow, whether it's prop type, or whether it's TypeScript, just find one that you're comfortable with and use it. It does help. And the last thing I also talked about was using alias import. It's very, very important to use alias import. We did go over how to set it up and also how it affects your project. So thank you, and any questions?